"You're still the joke," my father sneered at graduation. I jangled my new house keys and said, "Laugh now." As their smirks faded, the real secret spilled. My father's tone echoed like thunder through the theater. A burst of chuckles spilled from my family, their sounds merging into a bitter chorus of insult. My mother, true to form, sat motionless, her gaze locked on the leaflet resting in her hands, avoiding any glance in my direction. My elder brother, Jake, tapped my sister, Sarah, and both smirked like they were sharing a private secret. I shouldn't have been surprised. Every success I managed to claw my way toward, no matter how much pain or work it took, was always returned with mockery. My dad never admired me. My siblings enjoyed putting me down. My mother, she stood by and allowed it. So why had I believed tonight would be any different? Graduation was meant to be my victory, something I had achieved completely through my own perseverance. No loans from them, no uplifting words, just me fighting through endless fatigue and driven by a stubborn desire to prove, mainly to myself, that I held worth. And yet there they were, ridiculing it all like it was a comedy routine. Strangers' eyes landed on me. Quiet mutters drifted from nearby attendees, unsure of what they were witnessing. Some looked uneasy, others unsure. Nobody intervened. I didn't respond. I simply smiled, reached into my coat, and took out the keys I'd been waiting to unveil. I raised them slowly, letting the shine of the metal reflect under the lights. The laughter vanished. For the first time ever, silence took over my family. Time dragged. The only background noise came from the distant joy of other graduates celebrating with their loved ones. But in our aisle, stillness. My father peered at the keys in my grasp, his grin crumbling into something unreadable. Jake leaned closer, a flicker of concern crossing his face. Sarah's stare bounced between the keys, and my expression like she had stumbled upon a riddle she didn't understand. "What's that?" my father finally muttered, his tone quieter but still tinted with disdain. I spun the keys gently between my fingers and replied, "Oh, these?" They unlocked my new residence. Sarah snorted awkwardly, her go-to sound when uncomfortable. "Sure you did. You can't even keep up with your rent." I turned to her, keeping my expression calm. "Not rent. A home fully mine. No tenants, no leases, no one else's name on it, just me." I let the words hang in the air. Odd, isn't it, that someone as useless as me made it happen? No one said anything. I watched their faces begin to shift. Jake's features turned grim. My dad adjusted himself, arms folding as if trying to physically block out my words. My mother blinked as though she'd misheard what I said. For once, none of them had a reply. I allowed the silence to stretch longer, relishing the unfamiliar feeling of power. Then, as though nothing had occurred, I returned the keys to my pocket and stood. "Well done, young man," my professor greeted as I stepped forward, handing over my diploma. His handshake was firm and proud, so different from the apathy I'd grown used to. I turned once more toward my relatives, diploma in one palm, keys in the other. "So?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Still funny?" Nobody laughed, but they had no idea that this was only the beginning. Their speechlessness was thrilling. For as long as I could remember, I had been the family clown, the disappointment, the failure, the extra weight. But now I stood here with proof in both hands, a degree and a new property, and not one of them had a clever insult to offer. I wanted to let the truth dig into them the way their words had carved into me over the years. I slipped the keys back into my coat and turned to go. "Hold on," my mother called softly, slicing through the quiet. Her voice was fragile. "You bought a place?" I halted, one brow lifting. The same woman who had ignored me unless it served her, now suddenly interested. I turned back, meeting her eyes fully. "Yes," I said calmly. "I bought it." My dad let out a dry laugh, but there was tension behind it. "And How exactly did you pull that off? You've never had real income. There it was. He wasn't impressed. He wasn't intrigued. He felt threatened. I nearly chuckled. He had spent the entirety of my existence hammering into my mind that I was destined to fail, that I lacked strength, that without their guidance, I would collapse. Yet now I stood firmer than ever. I moved in slightly, dropping my tone so that only those in my bloodline could catch it. I achieved it the same method I earned my degree. Without a single ounce of your assistance, I murmured, eyes locked tightly on the man who raised me. Just like I shaped a future while you were too occupied, hoping I'd crumble. I gave them a moment to absorb it before I added, by not turning out like you. His breathing flared, and for a brief moment, I thought he might rise and strike me on the spot. That was always his solution. When authority escaped him, he reached for rage, threats, and control. But this time, he was empty-handed. I turned around, walking toward the doors. If I exited now, my triumph would be complete. Then Jake mumbled under his breath, just loud enough for me to catch. Probably some rundown place in a lousy zone, he chuckled. No chance he owns anything respectable. I halted slowly. A grin stretched across my face as an idea bloomed, one that would turn this triumph into something unforgettable. I slipped my hand into my pocket, pulled out my phone, tapped through a few screens, and turned it to face them. On the display was a vivid image of my home. Not a flat, not a broken-down dwelling, a full residence, stylish, clean-lined, behind secure gates, the kind of home they couldn't picture me ever possessing. Sarah leaned closer, her lips parting slightly. Even my mother's hands fidgeted like she was resisting the urge to grab the device to confirm it wasn't some illusion. My dad's face, though, twisted into something sour and cruel. I recognized that face. It wasn't fury nor disbelief. It was resentment. That was when I realized they were cornered, and they didn't yet understand just how much I'd uncovered. The jealousy settled over his face like a thick shadow, heavy and choking. I had seen that storm behind his eyes before, whenever Jake earned praise or Sarah was applauded, but not for me, not until today. Sarah's glance darted between the image and my expression, confusion slowly giving way to something different. Fear, not concern for me, but fear for herself. "You're lying," she said, attempting a laugh that sounded sharp and unnatural. "You expect us to believe that?" "Oh, but it's true," I said easily, cutting her off. "Funny thing is, I wasn't even planning to mention it tonight. I was going to accept my certificate and leave peacefully." I turned toward Jake, whose jaw was tense like a steel trap, but then you had to open your mouth, and now I sighed slowly, shaking my head. Now I'm forced to share. My dad's fingers balled into a fist at his leg. "Enough of the riddles," he barked. "If you've got something to admit, spit it out." I had been waiting for him to say that. I pocketed the phone, raised my posture, and smiled wide. "All right, then. Let's dive in." My gaze moved slowly across their faces, watching their self-satisfaction peel away piece by piece. "Dad," I began calmly, "did you really assume I wouldn't discover the secret loan?" All color vanished from his skin. Bullseye. Sarah's mouth dropped open. Jake straightened, his head shifting back and forth between us. "What's going on?" "Silence, Jake," our father barked, though his voice cracked like glass. "I wasn't stopping now," I continued, watching the panic rise like steam. "The one you took out against the property last winter, the one you conveniently forgot to mention to Mom." My mother turned her head toward him so sharply, I thought her neck might snap. "Excuse me?" she breathed. That's when the unraveling began. Her features shifted. I saw the pieces click together in her mind, her jaw parted, horrified, and I pressed on. "You were risking borrowed funds at the tables, weren't you?" I said smoothly. You spiraled too far, and instead of facing consequences, you tied the house into the mess. I tilted my head slightly, feigning compassion. And now you're completely underwater. You arrogant, he snarled, his face burning with rage. I raised a single finger. He froze. We've barely started, I said, turning toward Sarah. She turned pale. Don't you dare. But I must, I replied, tapping my cheek with one finger. Fascinating, isn't it? How people overshare online makes digging up secrets surprisingly easy. Sarah's throat tightened. You truly assumed nobody would catch on to your overspending, didn't you? I said, sounding amused. Lavish trips, brand-name purses, constant nights on the town, all that on a teacher's income? That's quite the feat. My grin widened. Unless, of course, it wasn't your paycheck funding all that. Her lips quivered slightly. Mom, I added, shifting my gaze to her, maybe it's time you asked Sarah where all that extra cash actually came from. Sarah's breathing hitched. That's not true, she snapped. Without a word, I retrieved my phone and navigated to a particular screenshot. Strange, I said as I turned the screen around, because these transaction logs show you've been quietly pulling money from Mom's savings for 2 straight years. My mother's hand flew to her lips. What? Ethan murmured something faintly, adjusting in his chair, his eyes never leaving the screen. I watched them all crumble before me, speechless, cornered by truths they'd kept buried.